You've heard Psalm 23 before. Maybe at a funeral, maybe in a hospital room, maybe during one of those nights when everything felt a little too heavy. The Lord is my shepherd. And for a moment, it calms you down, makes you feel safe, like someone is in control. But here's the strange part. If it's that comforting, why do so many people still feel anxious, lost, and afraid? Why doesn't it actually fix anything? And what if the real reason it feels so powerful is not because it's true, but because it's designed to feel true? That's the part most people never question. Why does religion call people sheep? Let's start with something simple. The Lord is my shepherd. Sounds nice, right? Warm, safe, familiar? But think about the second half of that sentence. If there is a shepherd, then what are you? A sheep. Now here is where it gets interesting. Sheep are not known for independence. They do not lead. They do not question. They do not stop and think, maybe I should go a different way today. They follow, and not carefully, not thoughtfully, blindly. If the flock moves, they move. If the flock runs toward danger, they run with it. And if they wander off, they do not correct themselves. Someone else has to step in. Now here is the uncomfortable question. Is that really the ideal image for a human being? A human being can think, doubt, analyze, and change direction. A human being can challenge authority and discover something new. That is the thing that moved us forward as a species. Yet here, in one of the most beloved passages ever written, that ability is quietly set aside, replaced with dependence. And the strange part is people do not resist that idea. They accept it. More than that, they embrace it. They say it with confidence, sometimes even with relief. I am just a sheep. God knows best. Think about that for a second. In any other area of life, giving up your own judgment would be seen as a problem. If someone said, I do not think for myself anymore, I just follow, you would probably be concerned. You might even suggest they take a break from whatever they are listening to. But here, it is presented as wisdom, as humility, as something good. So the question becomes harder to ignore. Why is dependence framed as virtue in this context, but not in any other? And once you start asking that question, something shifts. Because maybe the psalm is not just offering comfort. Maybe it is also teaching you how to see yourself. And that changes everything that comes next. I shall not want comfort or surrender. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. It sounds peaceful, almost like a deep exhale. No more stress, no more chasing, no more feeling like something is missing. For a moment, it feels like the pressure of life just disappears. But let's slow that down. Because if that sentence were literally true, people who believe it would not feel lack. They would not worry about money, relationships, health, or the future. And yet, they do, just like everyone else. So what is really happening here? The meaning quietly shifts. It stops being about reality and becomes about perception. You are not being told that life will give you everything you need. You are being told that you should feel like it does. And that is a very important difference. Because now, if you feel anxious or dissatisfied, the problem is no longer outside of you. It becomes internal. Maybe you are not trusting enough. Maybe your faith is weak. Maybe you are the reason you feel lack. Notice how subtle that is. The original promise sounds like freedom from worry, but it actually places a new responsibility on you. Not to fix your situation, but to adjust your mindset until it feels acceptable. And humans are surprisingly good at doing that. We adapt, we rationalize, we tell ourselves things are fine, even when they are not, because the alternative feels worse. There is also something else happening beneath the surface. This idea can reduce motivation. If you truly believe you already have everything you need, why push for more? Why question your situation? Why challenge anything at all? Now, to be fair, some people will say this verse is about contentment, not passivity, and that sounds reasonable. Contentment can be healthy. It can bring peace in difficult situations. But here is the tension. Contentment becomes dangerous when it stops you from seeing reality clearly, when it turns real problems into something you are supposed to accept instead of solve. So, the question is not whether the verse feels comforting. It clearly does. The question is what it quietly asks you to give up in return. And once you notice that trade, the rest of the psalm starts to feel a little different. Green pastures and still waters, the fantasy of divine care. Green pastures, still waters. It is beautiful, almost too perfect, peaceful, in a way that feels clean and simple, like nothing bad could ever happen there. And that is exactly why it works so well. Because real life does not feel like that. Real life feels like bills that never quite stop, deadlines that show up faster than expected, and those small aches that remind you time is doing its job whether you like it or not. Life is noisy, messy, and often unpredictable. So when someone gives you an image of complete calm, your mind holds on to it. It feels like relief. Like finally, something makes sense, something feels stable. But here is the part most people skip over. A beautiful image is not the same as a true claim. You can describe something in a way that feels real, even if it has no connection to actual experience. Think about those travel ads. You see the beach, the perfect sunset, the couple smiling like they have never argued about anything in their lives. What you do not see is the long flight, the lost luggage, or the coffee that somehow costs more than your lunch. The image is real. The feeling is real. But it is incomplete. Psalm 23 works in a similar way. It offers an ideal, a version of life where everything is guided, calm, and taken care of. But it does not show the full picture of human experience. And when people hold on to that image, something subtle begins to happen. They start comparing their real lives to that ideal. The chaos they feel does not match the peace they were promised. So the conclusion forms quietly in the background. If I do not feel this peace, something must be wrong with me. Not with the idea, not with the promise, with me. And that is a powerful shift, because instead of questioning the claim, people start adjusting themselves to fit it. But this is only the surface, because the next part takes that idea and makes it even more personal. He restores my soul. Why broken people are vulnerable to religion. He restores my soul. That line lands deeper than the others, not because it is poetic, but because it touches something people rarely say out loud. Life breaks people, not in dramatic cinematic ways, in quiet, ordinary ways. Disappointments that linger, regrets that replay at the worst times, small choices that somehow grew into big consequences over the years. The kind of weight that does not show on the outside but never fully leaves. And when someone feels that, they are not looking for abstract ideas. They are not interested in debates or philosophy. They want relief. They want something that feels like it can put the pieces back together. That is exactly where religion steps in, not at the strongest moment, but at the lowest one. And it offers a simple message. You do not have to fix yourself. Something greater will fix you. It is hard to overstate how comforting that is, especially for someone who feels tired of trying. But it is also where things become more complex. Because now your sense of healing is connected to something you cannot verify. You cannot measure it in any clear way. You cannot test whether it is working or not. The only way to access it is through belief. And belief becomes the key condition. If you start to feel better, it confirms the idea, God restored you. If you do not feel better, the answer is not to question the system, it is to keep believing, to try harder, to trust more. That creates a loop that is very difficult to break, one where the explanation always protects itself. Now, to be fair, people do experience real comfort. That part is not in question. People feel calmer, stronger, sometimes even hopeful again. But here is the deeper question that rarely gets asked. Is that change coming from something outside of you, or is it coming from your own mind responding to belief? Because the human mind is capable of powerful shifts when it finds meaning, structure, or hope. And if that idea feels a little unsettling, that is a good sign. It means you are starting to look beneath the surface. Because what comes next challenges not just comfort, but fear itself. The valley of death. Comfort in fear. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, now we move into deeper territory. This is not about calm fields anymore. This is where fear lives. Real fear. Illness, loss, and those quiet thoughts that show up in the middle of the night when everything feels uncertain. This is where Psalm 23 becomes powerful. It steps directly into that moment and offers a simple message. You do not have to fear. God is with you. And emotionally, that works. It brings relief. It softens the edge of something that feels overwhelming. But here is the honest question. Does saying something is with you actually make it true, or does it make the fear easier to carry? Those are not the same thing. One is about reality. The other is about how we respond to it. Humans are very good at creating meaning when they need it most. When something feels too heavy, the mind looks for structure, for reassurance, for a sense that there is something beyond the moment. That is not weakness. It is part of how we cope. But it also means something important. The feeling of comfort does not automatically confirm the source of that comfort. It only tells you that something inside you responded. Look across the world. Different cultures, different religions, different beliefs, all of them offer some version of the same idea. You are not alone. Something is with you. And people in each of those systems feel real comfort from that belief. They cannot all be right in a literal sense, but they can all feel right. That is the key distinction. Once you notice that, the verse starts to shift. It becomes less about proving something external and more about understanding something internal. How belief interacts with fear. How reassurance changes perception. And that realization opens the door to a deeper question. Because the next part of the psalm introduces something that sounds comforting, but carries a very different implication when you look closely. The rod and the staff, protection or control? Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This line sounds reassuring at first, almost like a promise of safety, but when you slow it down, it becomes more complicated. A rod is not symbolic in a vague way. It is a tool, a solid stick used to defend the flock from threats. That part makes sense. Protection feels comforting. Most people would agree with that. The staff is different. It is used to guide, to pull, sometimes to correct direction. It is not just about safety. It is about control. About making sure the sheep goes where it is supposed to go, even if it would choose differently. So in simple terms, one protects you and the other directs you, and somehow both are described as comforting. That is unusual, because in most areas of life, being controlled is not something people find comforting. If someone tried to guide your every move, you would question it immediately. You would want to know why, and whether they should have that authority in the first place. Imagine your neighbor knocking on your door, holding a stick and saying, "Do not worry, I am here to guide your decisions." You would not feel safe. You would probably close the door and check the lock twice. But in this context, everything changes because of how it is framed. It is presented as care, as love, as something done for your benefit. And that framing is powerful, because it teaches a subtle idea that being directed, corrected, even restricted, is not only acceptable, it is good, something you should trust, not question. That shift matters more than it seems. Because once someone accepts that idea, they become more comfortable handing over their judgment. They begin to see guidance not as something to evaluate, but something to follow. And all of that works smoothly, as long as one condition is never challenged. The one holding the rod must always be right. Because the moment that question appears, the entire sense of comfort starts to change. And that leads directly into how this way of thinking shapes the way people interpret everything around them. The table before enemies turning life into spiritual warfare. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. At first, it sounds empowering, almost like a quiet victory. You are not just surviving. You are being honored while others watch. But notice what just happened. Life is no longer just life. It becomes a battlefield. There are enemies, there is favor, there is a sense that something larger is unfolding behind the scenes. That can feel powerful. It gives structure to struggle. Hard moments are no longer random. They are part of a story, a test, a conflict, something that leads somewhere meaningful. People naturally want that. It makes pain easier to carry when it feels like it has a purpose. But there is another side to this. It divides the world. There are those who are on the right side and those who are not. Those who are protected and those who stand in opposition. And once that idea settles in, it starts shaping how everything is interpreted. A disagreement is no longer just a disagreement. It becomes opposition. A difficult situation is not just bad luck. It becomes part of a struggle. Even ordinary events begin to feel like pieces of a larger plan. And that changes perception more than people realize. Because now every outcome needs an explanation. Success becomes confirmation. Something is working in your favor. Setbacks are reframed. They are tests, obstacles, or temporary setbacks on the way to something better. In both cases, the same conclusion is preserved. That is where the human mind plays a role. We are very good at connecting dots. We look for patterns, for meaning, for stories that make sense of what we experience. But sometimes those patterns are created after the fact, not discovered, but built from interpretation. Once you notice that tendency, the verse begins to feel different. It is no longer just about victory or reassurance. It is about how meaning is assigned to events. And that leads directly into one of the most subtle mechanisms in the entire psalm, one that quietly reinforces itself without being noticed. Goodness and mercy, why it always seems true. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me. It sounds reassuring, almost like a quiet guarantee that life is somehow on your side. Like no matter what happens, there is something positive working behind the scenes. And emotionally, that idea lands well. People want to believe that things are not random, that there is some kind of direction or care guiding events. It makes uncertainty easier to live with. But look at how this actually plays out in real life. When something good happens, it feels like confirmation. A door opens, a problem resolves, something unexpected goes your way, and it fits perfectly into the belief. This is the goodness and mercy being talked about. Now look at the other side. When something bad happens, the belief does not break. It adjusts. It becomes a test, a lesson, part of a larger plan that is not clear yet. Maybe it will make sense later. Maybe it is necessary for something better. Either way, the core idea stays intact. That is not accidental. It is how the human mind works. We tend to notice the things that support what we already believe, and we reinterpret the things that do not fit. It is a natural process, not a flaw, but it has consequences. Once a belief is structured this way, it becomes very stable. It does not need to be proven in the usual sense, because every outcome can be explained within it. Think of it like this. When someone buys a red car, suddenly red cars seem to appear everywhere. They were always there, but attention shifts. The brain highlights what matches the expectation. Religion often follows a similar pattern. It trains attention towards certain interpretations, certain meanings, certain connections between events. And over time, that creates a sense that the belief is constantly being confirmed. The important question is not whether people feel that confirmation, they clearly do. The question is whether that feeling is coming from external evidence or from the way the mind processes experience. And once that question is on the table, the final promise of the psalm takes on a very different weight. Dwelling forever, the promise you can't test. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is the final note of the psalm, and it is not just comforting, it is absolute. Not just peace for a moment, but security that never ends. No uncertainty, no loss, no final goodbye. That idea carries a lot of weight. Because underneath everything else, humans share a deep fear. Not pain, not failure, but the idea of simply not existing. The thought that one day, everything just stops. So when a promise appears that removes that fear completely, it feels like relief. Not small relief, but something much bigger, something that answers the question people rarely say out loud. And emotionally, that works. It gives a sense of direction, of meaning, of something lasting beyond the limits of life. But here is the key issue that often gets overlooked. This is a claim that cannot be tested. Not now, not later, not in any measurable way. There is no method to verify it, no way to check whether it corresponds to reality. The only way to accept it is through belief. And that makes it different from almost everything else people rely on. In daily life, we expect some form of evidence. If something important is claimed, we usually want to know how we can know it is true. Here, that standard quietly disappears. Instead, certainty is offered without verification. Confidence is encouraged without a way to confirm it. And over time, that certainty can feel just as real as something proven. That is where the structure of the psalm becomes clear. It begins with comfort, moves through dependence, reinforces belief, and ends with a promise that secures everything before it. Not by evidence, but by the feeling of certainty itself. And once you recognize that, the entire message starts to look less like a description of reality and more like a system designed to be believed. Psalm 23 is beautiful. There is no denying that. It speaks to fear, pain, and hope in a way that feels deeply human, almost like it understands something inside you. But that is exactly why it deserves to be questioned. Because beauty can persuade without proving anything. Comfort can feel like truth, even when it is not. And sometimes, the ideas that calm us the most are the ones we hold on to the tightest, without ever asking why. So maybe the real question is not whether this feels good. That part is obvious. The real question is whether it is actually true. Because those are not the same thing. And maybe the strongest version of a human being is not someone who hands over their direction, but someone who can face uncertainty without needing a shepherd. Someone who can stand on their own thinking even when it is uncomfortable. Not because it feels safe, but because it is honest.